This is awkward, but yeah, it's another episode of the Shea Anything podcast, and the Mets still haven't hired anybody. But we will discuss the latest in their thinking about potentially hiring somebody with Andy Martino checking in with us from the GM meetings. It all starts right now. Welcome to the show, everybody. It's Doug Williams, Andy Martino, and Jerry Blevins with you on this episode of the Shea Anything podcast. It's a stacked crew. A reminder that you can subscribe, rate, and review this podcast wherever you're listening. We appreciate it. And Shea Anything is brought to you by Verizon. It's 5G built right for the Mets from the network. More people rely only on Verizon. You can catch all of us on Baseball Night in New York, weeknights, 6 o'clock on SNY, the good old-fashioned TV station on your cable service or NBC Sports app, wherever you can find SNY these days. I still have cable, I guess.
I use a tube television with rabbit ear antennas.
Yeah, that works too, I think. Okay, so Andy's joining us for the top of this podcast from San Diego-ish, California. I'm still a little,
yes.
I'm a little unfamiliar with where exactly you are because I've heard it called like 3 different things.
It's like you fly to the San Diego airport and drive about a half an hour south. You pass Todd's house somewhere, I think. No, he's a little bit up above San Diego area. He told me he's like
an hour south of San Diego, Mexico.
I'm in Mexico. You didn't know that?
I just know that.
I don't know. Maybe I'm north. I just got in the Uber, honestly, and I've been in the property the whole time. It's like
I'm pretty sure you'd be in Tijuana if you were.
You're probably right.
I was going to say, if you were south, you wouldn't be in Carlsbad. You'd be in like Carlos Malo.
Right. I might be north or east or west.
Is that a direct translation of Carlsbad?
That's Spanish. I like anyone who's covered a winter meetings or GM meetings will understand. You get here late, you get in the Uber, you stay on the property. I haven't left this property since Sunday, and I don't really know where I am.
I'm looking it up right now.
I'm in the metaverse.
You might as well be in Vegas. You're in the metaverse. That's right.
You were very much north of San Diego, Andy.
Okay, well there you go.
Yeah,
fact check that for me effectively.
There we go.
Sorry,
all right, so since you've been out there, Andy, really you had your first reveal of a mystery candidate that you had reported on. That's exciting. It's Adam Chromie, former assistant GM of the Nationals. Tell our listeners a little bit about him, what you've learned about him since it was discovered that he was the mystery candidate, and how serious this thing is.
He's known as a really good guy who the risk of that hire would be the lack of experience in any kind of management. He was like assistant GM when he left the Nationals. This is in the weeds a little, but it's just similar to the job that Ian Levin does with the Mets now, or that John Ricco used to do, like arbitration, some analytics, never has like led a department or anything like that, but is considered somebody with the personality who could grow into that potentially, but not experienced that. And then has been working at a law firm for about 4 or 5 years after leaving baseball. He's a serious candidate, but we're talking at 12 p.m. my time. No, your time. Oh my God, I'm so confused about everything.
You're in California. You know what time zone you're in at least, right?
Anyway, we're talking on before any of us has had lunch on Thursday, and I assume. And as of this moment, I'm disoriented, but the Mets are not close to a choice for GM. So they're kind of disoriented too in that sense, I guess.
So before I get to several follow-up questions I have for you, Andy, Jerry, I just am curious, how many strong relationships did you have with assistant general managers? Meaning, like, how many people in that role did you interact with often, if at all?
Lots, actually. From my days in Oakland, their now GM, David Forrest, was an assistant GM when I was there, and we were very close interacting. Farhan Zahidi, who's the president that we're searching for with the Giants, was an assistant GM with the A's when I was there, and we had lots of communication. And Andy named Ian Levin and Ricco, who I saw almost daily with the Mets. And so you interact with the assistant GMs quite often. And I have a lot of respect for every name. Like Ian and Ricco were great people, and more of my go-to between the GM and players. So these guys play an important role, especially with player relationships.
So that's interesting. You sometimes interacted and discussed more with an assistant GM than you would the actual general manager or president of baseball ops, whatever it was.
There's the GMs tend to be a little bit more upper management, and then the assistant GMs you kind of see around a lot more often, and you develop relationships on a more personal level. You know who they are, their family, they ask you the same questions, and it makes it a lot easier to communicate back and forth, to relay messages up and downstream. So yeah.
Well, I mean, that's interesting. And we've talked about, managing up and down, Andy, with a couple of the candidates that are kind of since out of consideration, how much experience they have managing up with somebody like Sandy Alderson, Steve Cohen. And it certainly seems like they're looking for somebody who can kind of be that go-between between something analytical and something more, scouting background, et cetera. One of the things that you've been on top of from the beginning of it being a story was the Mets' interest in David Stearns, the fact that he still has a year on his contract.
You go ahead and finish setting up this question, and I'll explain why even that's confusing.
Okay. So the average person at home, which I'm guessing, I'm just talking about myself, thinks that David Stearns of the Brewers has one more year left on his contract, and that the Mets are very much interested in eventually naming him to be their president of baseball operations, but they can't do that yet because he's under contract, and we're all just waiting a year, and it's an inevitability, and they'll hire him. How much of that is much more complicated, Andy? True, false, whatever?
Yeah, there's something to that, as we've talked about. But things change so often, and that's a long time in baseball years. So if the Mets are winning by the time Stearns is available, maybe they don't need anyone at that point. Maybe Cohen and Alderson have fallen in love with whoever they've hired and forget it. Or maybe the Brewers aren't as successful, and there's another person who seems like the candidate in a year or two. All those things are possible. The Mets definitely have their eye on Stearns. They don't know when he's going to be available because they're under the impression that he has a vesting option in his contract, where he could actually be under Brewers control for 2 more years. They're not sure about that. And Stearns isn't answering questions about it. So that is unclear. And they obviously, because of the permission stuff, Steve Cohen and David Stearns have literally never spoken to each other. So
Stearns wouldn't even say, if Sandy called him and said, "Hey man, how much do you have a vesting option in your deal?" So you can't do that. It's not even like Stearns has decided not to say. He can't say.
All that Sandy could do is call other teams' executives in his gossip chain or reporters and say, "What are you hearing about Stearns' option?" And people go, "I think it might be 1. I think it might be 2. He didn't say." That's literally what they know. And they could finally get the chance to meet Sandy's Cohen and Stearns in 12 or 24 months and be like, "Oh, there's no chemistry in this room. Forget it." Or he could be the guy. That's kind of where it is.
Jerry, what do you think of the idea of it kind of being this, again, to Andy's point, it's a long time in baseball years, but the idea that the Mets are intrigued and interested in Stearns, but he will not be available even maybe for a year, and that they're trying to hire someone in the interim. Don't you think that would be a weird job to take if you knew that there was this kind of cloud lingering over everything?
No. Well, there's 2 approaches. I'll answer that second question of, would it be weird to take this role knowing that there's something looming? I don't think it would be weird at all, because everybody's looking for that opportunity. The opportunity to get in a management role. Andy talks about some of the shortcomings on some of these assistant GMs not having upper management, control, that kind of thing. This is a great way to get some experience in a big market. So it's still very intriguing. On the other part of that question, I think it's really imperative for the Mets fans, us as well, to understand that Stevie Cohen and Sandy Alderson, for the most part, are thinking big picture. These are big moving parts. This isn't for this coming season. This is for the shape of the Mets' future. This is long-term focus. It's hard for us to think about it in those terms because we want we have DeGrom, we have Francisco Lindor, we have these guys that are ready to win a World Series now. But Stevie Cohen owns the Mets for, the rest of his life, and his kids probably behind him. This is shaping the future of the Mets long term. So they will be patient in these really big decisions, even though they need to name a GM, somebody to do the day-to-day stuff. The big decisions, there's no rush. You got to find the right person with the right ideas to implement to see the Mets future the way they want to shape it.
I think that's a really interesting point. And Andy, I was listening to Sandy talk to the media earlier, and he was asked kind of about the manager, which has become an afterthought. And he was like, well, we do have one coach, talking about Jeremy Hefner. And I was thinking, man, like, yes, in the scheme of a regular baseball offseason, forget about the CBA, which we'll talk about in a second. I mean, the Mets are so far behind. However, to Jerry's
they have
point,
literally only Jeremy Hefner.
They have Jeremy Hefner.
He's great, but you know, you can't coach third, first, and sign free agents. They need some more people.
But to Jerry's point, like, the decisions that they make in the next couple of months, big picture, are not that important compared to what I'm sure Sandy and Steve Cohen are looking at this hire meaning, which is like, are we going to be competitive in 5 or 6 years? How is Sandy Alderson leaving behind this franchise once he eventually retires? Like, these are the kinds of things they're thinking about, right?
Yeah, that's right. Those are great points. And it's one of the reasons they're really taking their time here. The Mets are obviously frustrated that they're getting pilloried by a lot of fans and media about how long this is taking. But because it's as important as you guys have just stated, they're like, we are going to take our time and get this right. Even with this Adam Chromie that we've been talking about, they've interviewed him, they like him, but there's absolutely no need to propose to somebody, hours after your first date. It's a very big commitment that they're making, and they're really vetting and trying to get everything right. And even as of last night, literally Alderson here was digging on other candidates, that are not Adam Chromie, at least 2 others. So they're just trying to be really methodical.
I like the perspective Jerry gave too on the idea that this is still an appealing job, even if you want to be skeptical about it, even if it's 1 year, it's the Mets GM job. You're going to be in control of, acquisitions and, the way you handle the media and press conferences, the certain decisions you make, Sandy Alderson's review of you, Steve Cohen's reviews of you, all of those things will make it easier to get your next job. If it goes well, if you believe enough in yourself. And I don't know, we keep being, some of us are being snarky about how appealing this job would be. And I think we should remember that just because certain people don't want it because of their particular situation, there are reasons that someone would take this job, Jerry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 100%. This is a desirable job, especially for somebody, like you said, that believes in themselves. This is a chance for them to step up to the big leagues, to use a phrase that gets overdone. This is it. This is coming to that top level and seeing what you got, and it's very intriguing for a lot of people. And I love that Sandy still shows some his personality and jokes about, well, we have one coach, because I think his sense of humor gets left behind a little bit, and it's nice to see him have some moments like that and show some humanity.
There was, Jerry, did you play with Duda? I can't remember. You did.
I did,
yeah,
yes.
Yeah. There was a GM meeting many years ago before Duda had that big year where he hit the 30 home runs and came into his own, and they were trying him in left field, and Sandy was leaving the GM meetings on the last day, and we were like, what do you think about your outfield? Sandy outfield, he goes, what outfield? And everyone laughed, and real super dry. And then poor Duda was the guy, he's like, oh, he's like, oh, you're ripping on Duda. He was their only outfielder at the moment. Anyway, you're right. He's got one-liners. Actually, before Alderson met the media on Tuesday, whatever it was here, his wife called him and he steps aside. He's like, yeah, I'm just about to meet the press. And he's like, no jokes. I know. His wife actually had to remind him that this wasn't the time.
Keep it serious.
Yeah. Speaking of the one coach that they have, Andy, dare I ask if there's been any buzz around their next manager?
None. Not at this time. You know what? You know that guy Brandon Gomes, who was a former pitcher, he's like 35, 36, and he was a possible candidate. He's in the Dodgers front office, staying with the Dodgers, possibly going to be Dodgers GM. I'll say this. If Jeremy Hefner weren't wearing a uniform, he'd be in these conversations. He's not for GM. He's not like he's going to be the pitching coach, but he's got the kind of mind and profile where if he'd chosen that other lane, he could actually be in that.
Oh, so you weren't saying Gomes was a potential candidate. You're saying Hefner could have been Gomes.
Yeah, Gomes was a Mets candidate before he decided to stay in LA because he's going to become the GM there at some point. But Hefner, like if they really get hard up, they could we've got our pitching coach is like one of these guys who would be in this mix. I'm just saying.
Interesting. Is that based on reporting or like?
No, I'm just saying that he's that kind of guy. He's got that kind of intelligence and profile to be. If he wanted to throw his name into a GM mix, he would deserve consideration.
I teed this up to you this way on Baseball Night New York the other night because Chris Carlin. It sounds like something Seinfeldian. Mm-hmm. Like he tweeted like another outside the box potential hire in Chromie. Like, why don't you stay inside the box?
The box.
We've already gone outside the box. Doesn't work outside the box. Stay inside.
Now, the one thing I went on Chris's show. I argued with him a little about that. I don't think Chromie is an outside the box hire at all because he is like an assistant GM white guy in his late 30s or early 40s. Like I've been at the GM meetings all week. There are 900 of these guys. No offense to any of them. That's the box. Just the guy went to a law firm, but other than that, that is inside the box. You know what I'm saying? There's one type of guy that usually gets these jobs.
Yeah, that's the guy that's actually held that role but left. He's still in that very white guy box.
Right.
Yeah, he's occasional quarter zip, maybe Brooks Brothers, like non-iron button down.
If you asked me, if you said, Andy, I'll give you $5 if you can bring me a man within 2 minutes that fits that physical description and clothing, I could. I just walk right out of my door in my hotel room and I would bring you a guy that looks like that. They're like
maybe
everywhere.
Patagonia vest.
Jerry knows about Jerry. Everywhere you played, they've had like 3 of those guys, right?
That's the truth. Hey, I wanted to touch on something, Andy, that you just said about Hefner. Is that something that's possible for him to move up? So I played with a guy named Craig Breslow.
Yeah.
And so he's kind of that role. I think he's still with the Cubs.
Yep.
He's a Yale grad, really smart guy. He's like their pitching guru, their coach above their pitching coaches.
Yep.
Is that something that Hefner's being kind of groomed for to possibly move from the dugout to above that?
That's a great question. Yes.
He's the assistant GM
in a sense
and vice president of pitching.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah. So when I was there, he was a Wall Street Journal wrote an article about him being the smartest man in baseball.
I remember that. Yeah. And he's a good guy too. I mean, you know him better than I do, but I remember covering him. He made a big error in a World Series game in 2013, pitching for the Red Sox. And he was like extremely accountable, talking about, I think it was a throwing error, talking about it for hours. He was really classy about it. Anyway, good question about Hefner because I think there was a lane for him to actually transition into that like this winter. But like if I think the Mets would have considered him for that. And I don't want to speak for Hefner, but I believe he enjoys being the pitching coach.
I would attest to that for sure.
Yeah, but he has enough of a reputation where I think he would have had the leverage to maybe go a couple different ways and still could, he's going to be the pitching coach next year. But if he said, I want to trade these baseball pants for khakis and go that path, he could. Like Breslow's probably in that job in uniform occasionally if he's in spring training or something, and often like in the front office. So like a hybrid, I would guess.
That's my assumption, that he's on the field, gets to talk pitching, gets to talk to the guys, but also can step out of that role and throw on his khakis and be the smart guy.
I'm just picturing
only 35, 36. So he's got a lot of time to figure
Which ones
out.
Are the tearaways? Are the baseball pants the tearaways, or are the khakis the tearaways?
It's interesting. I think khakis are easier. I've never seen tearaway baseball pants, I don't think.
What if
We should.
Walker Buehler
By the way,
traded?
I lobbied for that for a few years in the bullpen. To like when the phone rings in the bullpen and they call your name, I'm like, it's my turn. You do the basketball tearaway to run up onto the mound. I
like
lobbied
that.
for that.
I think the way that you'd have to tell Hefner that he got the job if you were Sandy or Steve Cohen is put like a hanger of the full outfit, like in his office. And like when he gets back from after a game or like some sort of side session, he comes back in his office and there's khakis, a blue, like very generic button down, and then a gray Patagonia fleece. And you're like, it's time, son.
Sounds about right.
Let's take that uniform off. All right, Andy, we'll let you get back to schmoozing with the Patagonia vests. Thanks for spending about, I don't know, longer than we were expecting.
It was a while. That's okay.
20 minutes with us.
I'll say, I came here a little late because I was talking to Brody Van Wagenen, and I'll give him credit. He's got the Ray-Ban still, the hair, the sport coat. He's cut from a slightly different style cloth. He's got his own thing going. He doesn't.
Yeah, and that was a whole big thing. It was like there were articles, like every lead of every column when he got the job was like in his nice suit. It's like he was some weirdo.
It's amazing though how he's able to put himself together. I mean, he's like travel day to day, so he's wearing this like short sleeve thing with 3 buttons on the top and like these perfect jeans, and his hair is still like this. It's really early in the morning out here. But when I saw him, it's like I think he sleeps in some kind of chamber where nothing gets ruffled, wakes up like that. It just walks out the door. It doesn't matter what hour of the day. He's always so put together. Anyway,
like if the fire alarm went off in the middle of the night at that hotel, you'd come out and he'd be in like
absolutely, no question.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it's almost worth blowing the fire alarm if I knew it. I want to see him with messy hair so bad. All right, bye,
Andy. Once again, you're listening to the Shea Anything podcast brought to you by Verizon. It's 5G built right for the Mets from the network more people rely on only on Verizon. We want to get your perspective, Jerry, just on the state of this team. Because on one hand, you could, I think, make the argument that they have a lot of roster holes, say nothing of the, front office hire, lack of a manager, hitting coach, et cetera. Like they have a lot of work to do in order to build this roster into a winning foundation. On the other hand, we've already said in the podcast, they have Francisco Lindor, like you mentioned, Pete Alonso, Jacob deGrom, there's something there. And they have a pretty high payroll. So do you think that we are close to seeing a winning product, or do you think we are far away from seeing, a team on the field that resembles a potential World Series contender?
I still think so. Long-term, like signing a young guy like a Seager, a Correa to a long-term deal is still very much on the table. But I think some of the gaps puts a guy like Max Scherzer out of the running for the Mets. Not that he would have signed with the Mets anyway, just because of his national stays or whatever the case may be. But it takes a guy with a short window like a Justin Verlander and Max Scherzer, guys that are trying to win another championship like immediately. I think it pushes them away because there's just too much uncertainty. But again, those long-term deals, you sit down with Stevie Cohen and Sandy and you try to put this together as a player moving forward. You're not thinking about just this first 2 years, you're thinking about long-term as well. And so those guys are still very much in play. It's still a good destination. The bottom line is they will still be a very talented roster with a high payroll. So guys are going to come in, especially, money talks. We can only play baseball for a short amount of time. So if the contract is there, people will come and play. I promise you that.
I think it's really interesting to examine that, because what you're just saying, Max Scherzer didn't, and Andy's reporting kind of corroborates this from earlier this week, that he didn't come to the Mets not because he doesn't like New York or anything like that. He wanted the best chance at winning a World Series and pitching deep into October in 2021. It feels like it's going to take years of playoff baseball for a free agent like that can go anywhere and has been to a lot of different places and played in October to choose the Mets. Like the reason you choose the Dodgers or the Cardinals or the Yankees is because you feel like you've got a better shot than the other 27 teams or whatever to make it. And even though the Mets have talent, you're saying that is a difference between a talented roster and like the lack of precedent that like they'll make it work and they'll make the postseason pretty much no matter what?
Well, I mean, again, you put a healthy DeGrom out there and the season's different because once you get to the postseason, like a Scherzer could have come to the Mets this past season, because you got DeGrom and Scherzer. It's a 1-2 punch that you could carry forever. I mean, that's kind of why he went to the Dodgers. But right now on the free agent market, especially with the CBA looming, there's just too many question marks for a guy like that. If he's going to sign early, which I think he will, because he's very attractive to a lot of teams that want to win, he's not going to choose the Mets because there's just too many question marks. But that could change, at midseason when the Mets roster that right now looks like it's talented and they're healthy and they're moving forward at the trade deadline. A guy like Scherzer, who's, got a no trade clause, could see the Mets and say, hey, look, man, they've got it together. They need me. Let's do it. Let's push them across, that threshold.
I know one of the things that Andy's been talking to people about these past couple of days has been the labor war, where we're headed with the December 1st deadline coming up. Players and owners feels like they're far apart. What can you tell me about what you're expecting, the tenor, the vibe of what you played through and what you're hearing?
Yeah. So I've been a part of some big time discussions from my days when I first got up in 2007. Donald Fear was our executive director, followed by Michael Weiner, and now Tony Clark. So I've been a part of a lot of labor discussions, and I was pretty hands-on for a long time. This one feels like there's a work stoppage looming, and it won't be a strike. The players will not go on strike. The owners will lock the players out. It'll be a leverage push, and there's a lot of things on the table. Like you look at who's playing every day now, and the push for the younger stars. Well, there's a push for the younger stars because they're really good and talented and ready to contribute. But there's also a push to let those guys kind of feel it out because they don't make the same amount of money as veterans. They will push out the higher to bring in the lower. It's just a fact. It's business. It's the way it goes. And so there's an imbalance right now. You see it in the qualifying offer. If the qualifying offer went down, that middle class is being cut out. The fact that the qualifying offer went down in money, moving into a CBA that's just done nothing but grow, and a sport that's done nothing but grow, it tells you kind of where we are in today's game. It's the guys at the top, the Scherzers, the Machados, the Bryce Harpers are going to get those max contracts. And then they're going to try to fill everybody else in at league minimum. And then whatever they can't do, they'll hire those guys with leverage to push their salaries down. So it's interesting. It's pretty scary as far as a fan goes, because there's something there. I hope there's a betterment for the good of the game, but it's never going to be that. Like, I just don't see it as being, it's there. People are going to posture. There's a lack of good faith. And I think it could get ugly. I hope it won't, because I love baseball and we need it. And I think we're in a good spot in the game, pushing some young superstars. I think if we continue that momentum, the game's exciting right now. I think we can move forward, but we'll see.
Similar to the point you were just making, I got to give credit to Sean Gelman, one of our producers at SNY. He said yesterday, we were trying to figure out what we thought Michael Conforto might get on the open market. And we were talking, maybe 4 for 80. And he was saying, nobody gets those contracts anymore. You either get the $250 to $400 million player these days, or you're getting the short-term pillow contract, 1 or 2 year, 1 year, in February or March for a player who deserves much more. That's kind of exactly what you're mentioning about, not that 4 years, $80 million has anything to do with the middle class and anything but baseball, but that's kind of what we're talking about, which is like, that's why the qualifying offer is going down. That's why there's a free agent camp at the end of, the long off season where guys who should have deals aren't signed. So you're saying you think maybe not Do you think we'll have baseball games that don't happen, or do you think this will just be an off season that it gets accelerated?
I still, I'm forever an optimist, and I always am going to think that baseball will happen, spring training will happen. But we'll see, man. Everything's on the table. It's all been pointing to this since really since that 1 year when all the guys that were in that middle class had that, you talked about that alternate spring training site. Ever since that happened, it's been looming. It's been a deadline, and the union has been preparing for that because, they're pushing those guys out, those veterans, the guys that make the middle, that the baseball middle class, as you put, they're pushing them out, and because they can pay the guys underneath, a lot less. And so it'll be interesting. You're not getting the best product out there with guys always trying to find a job. They think they can just fill the holes with a 22-year-old guy that knows how to throw really hard, or, a guy with pop in AA, comes up and he strikes out 90 times out of 130 at bats, and then they'll bring up another guy. And so it's interesting. It's scary. But ultimately I'll forever think that there's going to be a 162 game season until there isn't.
We had some fun with what we normally call rain delay recommendation. It's kind of like, it's depressing, but fun. So we're calling it, MLB work stoppage recommendation. So in the event that, we have a freeze starting in early December and, there's no free agent conversations happening, there might be no baseball. What should people watch to make that time go by a little bit faster?
Yeah, so it's not going to go by faster on this first recommendation because my first, MLB work stoppage recommendation is the Ken Burns baseball documentary. It's like 250 hours long, in pure Ken Burns fashion. But I wanted to really point to, he breaks it down into innings from the beginning of baseball, the first inning. So it's in the 8th and 9th inning. The 8th inning really starts in like the 60s and 70s. With Marvin Miller, who was the first executive director of our players union, talks about Curt Flood, talks about Messersmith and McNally, who were pitchers that played without a contract to break this reserve clause. It starts to talk about that into the 8th inning and free agency and what that kind of meant to baseball. And I think I really wanted to highlight Marvin Miller, who was our first executive director, who passed away in 2012. Led our union for 17 years, had one of the biggest impacts in baseball, especially non-player related. And for him to only get into the Baseball Hall of Fame this year, he was voted in 2020, inducted this year, tells you everything you need to know about how MLB looks at labor, because this guy should have been in the Hall of Fame on first ballot. Like, he's made such an impact. The game is better because of him. You see stars, people want to come and play baseball even more because of free agency and big contracts, and it became superstars. Players became the bright spot you made way for guys like Ken Griffey Jr. to be a superstar, a guy I idolized coming up, not just because of his ability to play the game, because his ability to shine on the field. So if you see that, so I recommend watching the Ken Burns baseball documentary. You can watch as much or as little as you want, and it can take up this entire off season.
That's it. That's the work stoppage. You'll be
that's
good
the one. But if you want to kind of take a peek at labor, it's very important to me, to a lot of people, union life. Take a look at the 8th and 9th innings. There's a bunch of really good stuff on YouTube about Curt Flood and what he went through. It's fascinating, and it's a piece of our history it's tragic and beautiful, and I love every bit of what they were able to do. So that's my MLB work stoppage recommendation.
I like that. I think it will give good context for people who are living through a work stoppage to know why these things are worth fighting for and what the precedent is here for a players union and the importance of there being one. So what about a holiday movie recommendation? Maybe something a little more cheery and bright.
Yeah. So I am not so I'm a huge Halloween fan, as we've covered. That's gone. I don't immediately throw up all my Christmas decorations right away, even though
So
my
you're not
wife wants
Anthony
to.
Recker. You're not Anthony Recker.
I am not Anthony Recker. I love fall, and I want to kind of highlight fall as much as I can. Although I am not a huge fan of the actual holiday of Thanksgiving, mainly because I don't enjoy, turkey and stuffing and cranberry sauce. That's not my style of intake. I love fall, and Thanksgiving represents that. So I want to do two. I want to do a Christmas and a Thanksgiving. So for Thanksgiving, go the other way. We're going to go completely light, and that is a Charlie Brown Thanksgiving. It's about as wholesome as you can get. It's a wonderful story about friends coming together and kind of the mischief that happens in true, Charlie Brown fashion. So it's a wonderful pick for Thanksgiving, because it's not only just the holidays, it's Thanksgiving is still a holiday too. Then you want me to move right into Christmas?
Why not?
Because we're here. Yeah, so
here.
we're still in that kind of gap here. It's not Christmas yet. I'm not really willing to, move on to like Elf and A Miracle on 34th Street, that kind of thing yet. So I'm okay with Die Hard, because I don't think it's a Christmas movie, but I think now is the time to kind of, that movie took place during Christmas. So I think Die Hard is the perfect transition to that, because it's a Christmas movie, but it's not a Christmas movie. So I think, Bruce Willis, becoming an action star, the kind of everyman that can, save the world. It was a transformation from, the 80s and early 90s of the Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone, like super mega human, to like this guy, John McClane, just a, guy going through a rough patch with his wife, and he ends up in this crazy thing. And it's an iconic movie. It was a transformation in Hollywood from, bit larger than life figures to just, I could have done that. So I think that's a wonderful transition to the holiday season.
Yeah. What's funny? Two things. I've never seen Die Hard. I knew
not
Jeff
surprised
was gonna,
at all.
I know.
I see Jeff
out.
He wants to throw.
He was like, while
down.
You were talking about Die Hard, there's so much nonverbal community. He was like nodding and as soon as I said, I knew he was going to be upset, and I'm going to have to listen to like 10 minutes of spiel after this is over. Secondly, there's a scene in The Office where Michael Scott's talking about the sequels of Die Hard, and he's like, in the first movie, he's just like an everyman normal guy. And then after he's like, jumping and like flying and then hit Michael's, the coworkers are like, you should review movies, man. That's really insightful of you. I just always thought that was funny, that like, that's what people love about Die Hard 1. And then the rest of them just kind of turned into something else, but I've never seen any.
I really liked Die Hard with a Vengeance. So that's still kind of that in the middle. It takes place in New York City. Jeremy Irons plays an amazing a villain. I think Samuel L. Jackson is like his cohort. There's a scene in that one in Die Hard with a Vengeance where they're mixing like a perfect amount between, three vessels, and it's like a math riddle. I was always fascinated with that. And in the bullpen, we do so many random things to like occupy our time, especially in the minor leagues when there's no scouting and that kind of thing. You're just working on your craft. We have a lot of free time. And so a lot of guys would bring riddles for guys to figure out. And that was one of them, like the pouring the amounts to find the perfect amount before you set it down and it weighs it so the bomb doesn't explode, kind of thing. So I'm all for the Die Hard, and I'm for anything that has to do with The Office.
Yeah, I mean, Office is my territory, my favorite show of all time.
I would tell you to go out and see Die Hard, but I don't even want to put that burden on you to feel like you have to watch it, because I know you're not going to. And I appreciate our friendship on that level, to where if you watch it, awesome, we can talk about it. But if you don't, I'm not going to be offended.
Well, I appreciate that. The restraint that Jeff has had not unmuting himself to yell at me it tells you everything you need to know about him as a man and as a producer. But yeah, it's on my list. It's a movie I know I need to see, but I've just never gotten to it. And I'm not one of these weirdos who just hasn't seen any movie. I've seen lots of movies. I just never got around to Die Hard, and I'm not a huge Bruce Willis guy. So that was, I guess, part of the problem. But
you're closer to the Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone type than you would be Bruce Willis. You're not relatable to the average man. You're above us.
Well, of course.
That's
I will
why.
say my favorite Bruce Willis character is from Pulp Fiction. Like that's what I associate him with, which I guess shows you.
That's good. I mean,
that's just kind of my, like, I'm more of a Tarantino fan than like your average like action movie. I don't know. I haven't seen.
I'm with you.
Name
amazing,
a 90s action movie. I probably haven't seen it. Like that's a genre that I in a time.
You're not a Steven Seagal, Jean-Claude Van Damme kind of guy.
No.
I'll tell you this though, Bloodsport. If you got to see it, that's one that's so bad that it's amazing.
Like I've never seen. I'm trying to think. Like Armageddon. Never seen it. There's a couple more.
What about
I've never
Speed?
seen Speed. Never seen it. Matrix. Never seen
Oh,
it.
you would love Speed. Speed's a fantastic movie. Like it's just an amazingly written, well acted. Sandra Bullock at her best. Lovable character with Keanu Reeves doing great. Dennis Hopper is an amazing villain in that, and it's just a cool concept.
Okay, well there we go. The whole movie.
Speed 2 though, do not. The worst, maybe the worst sequel to any movie of all time is Speed 2.
Okay. A reminder, everybody, to subscribe to the Shea Anything podcast, Apple, Spotify, wherever you're listening. We appreciate it. Another reminder, the Shea Anything is brought to you by Verizon. It's 5G built right for the Mets, from the network more people rely on, only on Verizon. Jerry, always good talking to you. Another great episode out of you. Thank you, my friend.
My pleasure. Appreciate it. See you, Doug.
All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. We will talk to you next week.